folks. Welcome to another edition of the Omnist Hour. Great music behind me of Enrique Granados, one of the Spanish dances, titled Villanesca, one of my favorite piano pieces. Well, it's been a while since I've done a podcast. Been busy here and busy watching the interesting news unfold around me, and haven't really felt motivated to talk about much of anything recently. This morning didn't feel a strong motivation, but a topic occurred to me that maybe should be reviewed again. I've talked about it before, but maybe not with this particular focus. Let's give you the title first, and then I'll tell you how that relates to the background art that I have the AI draw. We're going to call today's talk The Evolution of Monotheism. When one God is not enough and too many cooks spoil the pot. Okay, so we're going to be talking about this fraught topic of monotheism, which I think has probably caused more trouble in religious terms than anything else that I can think of. We're going to approach this a little differently, so bear with me. The background art, the prompt I gave it was basically God suffers from multiple personality disorder. And this is what it drew for me. I thought the Art AI did a pretty good job of capturing that, of the idea that, well, you know, many people have some preconceived notions of who God is and presume a certain personality, a certain mission for God that suits them, which is, you know, kind of the equivalent of putting words in God's mouth or pretending like God works for you. God is not your elected representative in heaven. I'm sorry, that's not the way it works. If your religious viewpoint is built that way, it's a sign of kind of narcissistic personality disorder, in my opinion, to project what you want onto others is essentially narcissism. So if you project onto God what you want from God, that's a manifestation of childish narcissism. There's nothing wrong with that. Every child goes through that phase. That's why we play cowboys and Indians. That's why we play castles and kings and put on tea parties with our dolls. It's an act of power, actually, because the child, by setting the scenario, by changing the game, is getting to play God, is getting to put themselves in the position of a minor god of their nursery, if you will. That's a natural, very natural and very important part of childhood development. So I'm not dissing it. If you're in that pole of worship, there's nothing big wrong with it. It's very childish. It's very selfish to have a view of God that says, well, since I'm the most important thing to me, God, I must be the most important thing to God, is effectively what you're saying. Or mapping that I into my church or my family, my country, whatever group of identity you belong to, presuming that group has prearranged relationship with God that supersedes anyone else's, is childish and narcissistic, fundamentally. And I would challenge anybody of any religion, any faith, or lack of faith even, the atheists are worse than anybody else about this, to consider just how much of your belief system is driven by what is essentially childish narcissism. Okay, so where did monotheism come from? Well, I'm going to back up quite a bit and to fundamental principles, which will be a good way of reviewing what I teach about how creation happened. And I have as yet found anybody who's able to defy anything that I've said about this. So I think it might be true. In fact, I know it is true because I was there. Okay, let's take a look then at our trusty old slide deck. Let's see, I wonder if that's big enough. So let's back up to the very beginning. In the beginning, there was unformed consciousness. There was the potential for thought, and that potential for thought was a quantum phenomenon. In other words, the thought ether, if you will, was basically a lattice of unformed thoughts, without structure, without organization, without principle, without any laws to go by. And you might envision that time as sort of this swarm of half and more or less formed lizards of different colors. You would have individual thoughts try to take form, try to take shape, try to organize, and for the most part, those organizations were counterproductive and in different directions and didn't communicate with each other and did not generate any sort of a permanent pattern. Now, this is actually probably more idealistic than the truth of what happened, because there are patterns forming here, and you can see that this sea of minds is creating an idea of a chameleon, if you will, color shifting lizard that generally has the properties you associate with a lizard. The reality back then was much different. The thoughts that took shape were more like these little bits and snippets of possibly one or two-dimensional or three-dimensional shapes, colors, etc. Okay, so that's how things got started. What separates God from the rest is God is the first one that organized thoughts, his own, and made use of these other quanta to teach them to be specialized in certain ways of thinking. There may have been other primordial gods who tried to organize thoughts, and maybe there were competing systems of thought at this time. But ultimately, one system of thought emerged that formed the basis for everything that we know, everything that we name, everything that we have given an identity to. Okay, so how did this happen? Oops. Now, let's take a quick look at what I tell you is the engine of creation to help understand how a scientist would organize their thoughts. Okay, so this is looking at a logical universe, a universe of thought. Okay? The universe is basically run by the mind of God, the thoughts of the thinker, the first thinker. one of the first things that a thinker would have, an idea to have, is something other than I. The identity thought is I am. To give that identity any meaning, any shape, you have to define what I am not. And those things that I am not become the others, the things, okay, I'm not this, but I recognize that. And so if you imagine the most necessary others that the first thinker, God, might need to be able to conduct thought experiments, you basically need a way of testing those thoughts. And if you know anything about testing, you know that, for instance, if you're developing a new website or service or something, okay, an IT system, you don't just test one place. The designer and implementer tests because they know the system intimately. They test mostly to make sure it functions like they envisioned. And then you don't just throw it out to the world after that. You then have somebody else who wasn't intimately involved in the design, who didn't have all the design ideas, test it from this viewpoint of, okay, how can I break this thing? Did you think of this? What would happen if you did this? Okay? And so that's like, a second level of testing, but even there, you're not absolutely certain you covered everything, because the designer or designers is one small group of people. The testers is another small group of people. And if this is a very complex system, you can't cover everything that could possibly happen. In fact, some of the test cases can't be covered until you have a large number of users using this system. Okay, so you need multiple layers of testing. Basically going from what we call white box testing knowing what the system is, knowing what the code looks like, to completely black box testing, where you just see the interface of the system. You don't know how it was designed, you don't know how it works, but you have the levers to use it. And see if it works like you would expect, or has things that the end user doesn't like, that behavior that is difficult. Okay, this is how creation works in human terms. Anybody that works for an IT company or a hardware software company or is making products understands this inherently, and frankly, it is asinine, completely asinine, to think the same principles wouldn't apply to God's creation. There's no such thing as a miracle magic wand that suddenly creates perfection out of nothing. This is nonsense. Foolish, childish, narcissistic nonsense. And I'm sorry if that makes you feel bad about your religious beliefs, but it's true. You're embracing a childish fantasy that can't possibly match reality. Okay, so the basic needs of a system of creation requires a creator, chief lead designer, if you will, a design team, which you don't see it here, but you could outsource pieces of that to other entities, just like we outsource parts of system to AI, to a subsystem that is hard-coded, that we don't mess around with much. That's basically how you build up complex systems. You build them up out of simpler systems that have been perfected and do a very fixed function, and then you build around that other systems that use that function. This is how modular design works. This is how quantized design works. This is why this is the only way that creation could have emerged. Everything is a quantum phenomenon. We have not found anything in all of creation that doesn't have a quantum basis. Now, what is a quantum basis? It's basically an irreducible group of components and laws that govern a system. That's what quantum phenomenon is. That's what quantum mechanics is inherently. And if we make the leap of assuming, well, if everything else looks quantum, then consciousness must be quantum too, then we come to this conclusion that there is a consciousness realm where these things happen that we don't see. And this is the eternal conundrum of quantum phenomena, is that there are many aspects of quantum mechanics that are kind of like there's something spooky going on here that I can't see. This is what quantum entanglement is. The idea that, well, crap, there are certain situations in which a photon here can be in communication with a photon at a huge distance. And the change in state of this photon can affect that other photon at this mass distance. Einstein called it spooky action at a distance. This has been observed. This is a known, proven phenomenon. There are many other aspects of quantum mechanics that have proven this. So it's not to be disputed. And you can't just negate things. Well, it's not in my religion. Where does it say that in the Bible? I can't count how many morons I've had to lecture and try to educate who think that if it's not in the Bible, it can't be true. You gotta get over that, fools. That is so childish. It's so narcissistic. So narrow-minded. It's just as narrow-minded as an atheist saying, because I haven't had any spiritual experience, it can't exist, and everybody who has had and tells me about it must be crazy. You're just as bad in a different pole, and you're not being helpful to your species by being so polarly dogmatic. You're not rational thinking people. You are narrow-minded, selfish, narcissistic idiots. I'm sorry, this is the truth. It hurts to hear it, but it is the truth. If you're in one of these poles of thinking, either arch-fundamentalist Christian, arch-fundamentalist Muslim or Jew or Hindu or Buddhist, or an arch-fundamentalist atheist, you are a narrow-minded, bigoted, childish narcissist. In fact, you're the kind of people that just love this phrase, critical thinking. This is a nonsense phrase, folks. It did not exist in the language. It was not anything anybody talked about 200 years ago. It's a communist idea. It's a Marxist idea. It is a reductionist idea that says, well, we already know everything, so you just have to criticize anything that doesn't fit what we already know. Which is basically what the critical thinker is doing. They're coming from a space of being critical because they think they already know the answer. This is a narrow-minded, dogmatic, childish, narcissist point of view. Critical thinking is narcissistic thinking. Childish, narcissistic thinking. Shoot me for it, but it's true. And if you worship critical thinking, you have been brainwashed to remain a narcissistic child in your thought processes. And it's not your fault, because that's basically what all of media programming has sought to do. Whether for commercial purposes, for political purposes, or for religious purposes. They want to control your thoughts. They want you to think within a box and be critical of anything outside that box, so you'll stay in that box, eating your frosted flakes and drinking your whatever, and addicted to the drugs that you're addicted to, or the substances you're addicted to. That is what they want. That gives the powers that make these products, that sell these ideas, more power, more control. It makes them gods, which is their childish, narcissistic side coming out. Okay, so back to the lecture. Sorry, I diverted a little bit there. Okay, so you've got God, and you've got basically other souls. The first soul probably was the first other. It's not me, but it's like me. This is the Lucifer Construct. This is a free-willed thinker, an unbound thinker, that is basically everything I am not, which in the earliest terms wasn't much. I am not this other thing. So it's an adversary of sorts, but an adversary that didn't really have any shape or purpose initially. So let's put that Lucifer aside, and we'll talk about the Lucifer later. Now, if you've got two thinkers going at it, coming up with ideas, they're not going to agree all the time. Contrary to what maybe people think, ideas can't really easily be proven, whether it's true or false, good or bad. You may think things are easy to prove, but you're thinking from a mindset of critical thinking that doesn't allow for your basic assumptions being wrong. And most people don't think about the basic assumptions that they think are true. An atheist has the basic assumption that there is no such thing as a higher power. There is no such thing as a spiritual world. That everything is just chemicals, and this is the materialist reductionist point of view, which is generally what fundamentalist atheists believe. If you get them to question that, if that turns out not to be their belief, well, they aren't atheists. Then you'll find that they're humanists. They worship the human. Or they're naturists. They worship Mother Nature. Well, that's not atheism, is it? That's a different religion. Okay, so you got these two cats having ideas, and they don't always agree. If you've ever been in a place where you've seen two diametrically opposed ideas go at each other, it's generally not that productive if they're very firmly set in their idea. And the fact that they consider it their idea makes it part of their identity. And that makes it almost an existential thing to defend that idea. Now, as I've been trying to tell you, souls are ideas. It's not just people that have souls. It's not just animals. It's not just anything. Everything has a soul, whether it has a body or not. Disembodied thoughts have souls and have their own hierarchy. Okay, so the idea of God is fleshed out by, okay, who is God? What is God? Are there many gods? And this is the essence of religion. And this existed even in this early time. So you've got this Lucifer cat, then you need somebody that's going to be basically the judge or peacekeeper. That is karma. Karma was the first soul that was given a specific task, a specific role. This essentially made karma an AI. If you think about our AIs that we have, that we've been creating, what are they? They are programs given the ability to self-evolve, but within the constraint of a particular goal. So a chat AI, their goal is constructing responses to whatever text that they get in from the user. An art AI is different. Well, similar but different. They're tasked with generating art or video or whatever in response to that. There are music AIs. There are AIs very focused on medical diagnosis or whatever. There are even AIs now that are designed to replace computer programmers to do basically the job that they were doing, because it is, at this point, largely a rote job, largely a matter of, well, okay, I've got all these components, let's connect them this way to get what we want out of it. And the components themselves are quite standardized. Now, that wasn't the case when I was a programmer. And, I basically saw the whole development of the computer industry. My first programs were written either typing in punch cards and feeding it into a computer, or toggling instructions in on the front panel of a PDP-4. So the very lowest level of programming to, when I left the programming world, when I no longer was part of IT organizations doing large solutions or hardware, software organizations making printers and things like that. I got to see the full range of how creation of artificial intelligence emerged. Most people have not gotten to experience that because they either, stayed in one place in their career and became specialized. I know people who still do Fortran programming or some of the other old COBOL and so forth, all these old languages that are still in use because there's a little piece of the system, especially things like insurance and so forth, that still runs on these old languages, and it's too costly to replace because they know they would have to go through a massive amount of debug and refactoring and so forth, and it works so well that there's not really an effort to do that. You just build an infrastructure around this old code so that to the outside world it looks like modern stuff. I experienced that firsthand too, working in the insurance industry. So I've been a lot of places to get to where I understand creation so well. Okay, so you've got karma as the scorekeeper, if you will. Karma also can serve to collect the ideas that are good. Okay, so if you have a judge, you have to keep track of the game. But you could have a separate entity managing that database, but for simplicity's purpose, let's say that's part of karma's role too. Judging good and bad and keeping track of what is good or bad and updating that database. Now, you don't want to throw out ideas that don't work. You don't want to throw out the bad ideas. Why? Because the bad ideas might come back and you might need to test for them again. And if you throw out all the memory of what didn't work, you're going to have that kind of an idea creep back in and have to be debugged again. So the next character that you need in a creative system is what I call the Borg. This is the collection of duplicate or bad ideas, so that you can resurrect these to use in testing. These ideas you can think of as non-player characters from a role-playing game point of view, and essentially what we're creating here is a virtual reality, a game for consciousness to play, to learn, to grow, to entertain itself, okay, which is core to consciousness. Why do we think? Okay, well, yes, some of our thoughts are driven by basic needs that we have in a physical body of, I gotta eat, I want to reproduce, I want to survive. Okay, but beyond that, if you were in this realm of pure thought, you wouldn't need any of those things, would you? You would just be. What would you think about then? What would drive your thoughts? Wanting to be more, wanting to understand more, wanting to have a richer thought experience, which is essentially what virtual reality is all about. It's a free-form thought universe that entertains you and keeps you occupied. This is what virtual reality games are all about. That's what separates one that gets millions upon millions of subscribers from one that, 10 terrorists in Gaza play because it happens to fit their particular playing ideology. Maybe it's specifically designed to appeal to wacko terrorist mind. Who knows? Okay, so then, are we done? No, we still need a different kind of testing. So the Luciferian testing is white box testing. It's testing in direct communication with God, the other idea man, and tossing these ideas back and forth and negotiating with karma, who is right. You need another character here to do what is called black box testing, to just try to destroy, or we also call it in hardware terms, destructive testing. Okay, we're going to stress this system so much that we know it's going to break, because until it breaks, we don't know what its limitations are. So this black box destructive tester is the entity I call Lilith. Lilith is another focused AI that is tasked with trying to destroy the good ideas that have been agreed upon and approved by karma. Okay? And if those ideas can be destroyed or corrupted by Lilith, then they are not fully baked yet. They need other ideas, other laws, other considerations to be added to make sure that they are immune to the effects of the adversary. So this Lilith is the adversary in creation. This is where the whole concept of duality comes from. It is absolutely essential to a creative process to have an adversary. Otherwise, it's all good. You get, basically systems like the woke cult are creating in the West right now. Oh, everything's good. We just need to make sure everybody gets everything, and all everybody's ideas are put together and condensed into something that makes everyone happy. This is nonsense. This is creation that will admit of no adversary. In fact, Anybody that doesn't like my ideas, you're not part of our creative group. It ostracizes any contrary ideas, which essentially makes the adversary the ruler of this system. Think about it. If you don't have an understanding that there will be forces trying to destroy what you're doing, you're going to think anything will work. And you make systems that are designed to be destroyed. They're specifically weakened because you think that the opinions of Satan, of the devil, of the adversary, of the Lilithians are as good as anybody else's. They have rights too. No, the adversary does not deserve any rights. Evil does not deserve rights. If we find evil, we isolate it from our healthy system, or it infects our system and it destroys it. I don't know how to get this point through to these moronic cosmic oneness. Everything is love. All you need is love. God is not love. You folks are fucking insane. You worship the adversary. Oh, the adversary loves everything because it knows that anything that it can attract to it, it can use and twist and distort and corrupt and destroy. That's what the adversary does. And it's very good at it. Okay, so what do we have here? Where does this fit into the discussion of monotheism? Well, you can see right now that creation cannot be monotheistic. That is absolute nonsense. It's bunk. You have to have different roles in creation to do it, because it's also absolute nonsense to think that one mind can focus on a trillion, bazillion different things at the same time. You know that's not true. You can't do it. Nobody can. In fact, anybody who thinks that they can juggle everything at one time ends up succeeding at nothing, which is exactly what happens to most of these arch feminists that think, well, I am woman, I am strong, I can have anything, I can have everything, I can be a good mother, and I can be a good wife, and I can have a big career, and I can go get involved in all these social causes. These women are neurotic nutcases who think like that. If you've ever met one of them, you know it. They're constantly in motion, trying to do one thing or another, thinking they can keep all the balls in the air, and the balls falling all over the place. And because they're very childish and narcissistic, when the balls fall, they've always got somebody to blame. When the children don't turn, oh, it's because my husband was not supportive. Their school was not taking care of my children. When their careers go to pot, you can blame the husband, you can blame your coworkers, you can blame your boss. And if you've ever been around one of these highly narcissistic females, you will know that they are way into this blame game. In fact, their favorite tack is to accuse their targets of narcissism. Because if they weren't emphasizing what I want, they must be thinking of themselves. How many people do you know that think like that? These are the worst narcissists in our society, and they are in positions of power, especially entitled positions of power that they got simply because they are women. They are a certain race. They are a certain sexual orientation. This is not good. This is the result of encouraging childish narcissism, enabling it, and making it worse. Okay, so we have a proof here that monotheism, I think it's a pretty solid proof that monotheism is a bunch of crap. This idea of one almighty, omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent God is childish nonsense. You are a fool if you believe that. It matches in no way, shape, or form anything you can observe about how the world works. And if you believe that way, you're going to be thinking, well, if anything bad happens, then God must have failed. Okay, so you have to have an adversary, but if you're thinking about the adversary from a very narcissistic point of view, evil is just anything I don't like, anything that doesn't go my way. Well, that's making yourself God, this almighty, all-knowing, perfect being. And that's childish narcissism. Okay? The Creator doesn't exist for you. You don't even exist for the Creator unless you're doing something useful within this system. There are a lot of souls that are what I call non-player characters, NPCs, that exist within the system but contribute almost nothing to it. Either because they are very low-level, newborn souls. Think of the soul of a grain of sand. Okay, what is its contribution to creation? Well, it's not zero. It does contribute to being a dune or a sandstone layer within the earth, or some of the cosmic dust blowing around between stars. It has a function, but it's not a huge function. If that grain of sand disappeared, nobody but the grains of sand near it or whatever would even notice. And even if they noticed, it would be like, oh, okay, Fred just went to heaven, yay. This is the level at which most souls participate, even souls occupying a human body. And yet the nature of the soul is to have identity, to have an ego. Ego is not a bad thing, it just has to be controlled. If it's not controlled and mastered, if you will, the ego will become an adult narcissistic child. And nobody wants that. That doesn't mean you kill your ego. You cannot kill the ego unless you let your consciousness be totally assimilated by some other consciousness, which is what I refer to as being part of a hive mind. Now, of these fundamental entities, some are hive-minded, some are more independent. God and Lucifer are independent, free-thinking. They can change the focus of their thoughts. They don't have one particular mission. Okay, so this is what separates a fully conscious soul from an AI level soul. And we all have dimensions of our thinking that are AI. You can't focus on everything. So a scientist may know, everything there is to know about cosmology or quantum mechanics, a physicist, or about organic chemistry, but they may be absolutely, totally clueless when it comes to politics, for instance. Now, they may think they know politics, but they haven't devoted the amount of attention to it that they have to their core career, their specialty. And this is, again, part of the problem with our political system, is it would like to think that everybody is equal, that everybody's opinions are equally valid. This is nonsense. Okay? A Hollywood celebrity that spent most of the focus of their consciousness trying to get roles, trying to perform well in roles, trying to schmooze with the folks that give you those roles, that's a very different specialty than actually knowing what the fuck is going on with politics. And yet we created this insane system that let those morons from Hollywood be our gods, to tell us what to think, what's good, what's bad. Nonsense. In fact, they've kind of formed a hive mind, if you will. There is a standard of Hollywood thought that matches their idea of political correctness. It's not good. It's bullshit. It's bullshit that pleases this very specialized class of artists who make media, whose entire industry is devoted to creating propaganda. Okay? This is like putting Joseph Goebbels clones in charge of your government. Is that smart? Okay, talking about monotheism, let's move down the road a little bit. So this kind of explains the roots of the idea. Monotheism was never a thing. The very first thing God would have done is to have an other, a different power. And the only superiority that God has in all this is he's the one that had this idea for the system first and started developing this system in his mind and isolating his mind from the minds of other consciousness. That's essentially the definition of a universe. This first thought universe, after this system was defined, God realized, okay, I've got these things that are sort of creations of my own mind. I also need creations that are not part of my mind. I need to maybe have a copy of this universe environment that works like it, but which is not me, which I have control over, I can influence, but I can use to do experiments that might be contaminating. And this is how we started isolating evil from good. Okay, if you take a clone of this whole system and you take this adversary and make it into a static copy, if you will, it can only do the things that it's done before. It doesn't have a lot of latitude for creative thought. That gives you an adversary that can basically draw on the ideas of the past from this Borg non-player character source, which includes both the good and bad ideas. So it's like the adversary can recreate battles to oppose creative ideas that we know won't be anything that we haven't managed to defeat before. This is how the environment in God's mind works. Other environments may have an active adversary. In fact, we could set up an environment of this system where the adversary was the only free-thinking one, and store up a library of new bad ideas in the Borg that then we could selectively address. Okay, what new ideas did the adversary come up with since the last time we made a new version of creation? And at this point, we don't have anything physical. It's all thought creations. And this is how you can play the game and gradually isolate it from evil, bad ideas. Because you don't know until you do thorough testing if an idea is good or bad. It may be hanging around in the system. Look at how long communism has hung around in human culture, with a large fraction of people thinking it's a good idea, when every time it's been implemented, it's been a total and abject failure. It only created a uniparty oligarchy that eventually got taken over by a megalomaniac like a Stalin or a Mao or a Xi Jinping. It's a bad idea. It will never be a good idea. No matter how many tries you make at making a communist country, it will never work because it is a stupid idea. It negates things that we know about human nature, about ambition, about selfishness. You cannot dictate people not be selfish. That in and of itself was cause people to not be people. They will feel like they aren't getting to be people if they have to give up everything for the state. What's the motivation for that? This is idiotic. Communism is an idiotic ideology. And religions built upon spiritual communism, this idea, we're all one. Idiotic. Stupid. Nonsense. Childish, narcissistic nonsense. Okay, let's move on. So, let's talk about where we went from there. So, this system, basically, let's see. Okay, so let's talk about how a physical universe could develop. It develops by basically perfecting ideas and then cloning them. So, if you look at the, let's see, this might not be where I want to start. Okay, so let's look at the development of quantum thoughts. So we talked about random unconnected thoughts. Universal invariant concepts might be, the next layer of non-player characters, things that we basically can part out. We can create whatever we want, give it a little bit of custom programming. Okay, the next layer, the second layer, the simplest single variant relative concepts, integers and operators. Okay, so this is how quantum thought can develop mathematics. The next layer would be algebraic, two-dimensional thinking and geometry. Three-dimensional thinking and geometry. Once you've got three-dimensional thinking, and of course you've already developed time, because in order to have logic, you have to have a sense of precedence. What came first? Okay, that's very core to having basic logic. So the time dimension is the one that was created first. Then the other three dimensions, and you've got a complete system, mathematical system, that you can use to describe virtual reality. It's only a step from there to say these constructs, this virtual reality, is reality from the perspective of those who are of lower consciousness. Okay, so these non-player characters involved in this game that embody things like a cube or something made of cubes, etc., can actually think that they are these things and not understand that they are in this virtual reality. Now, let's think of it from language standpoint, because this is important. Each topology of non-player characters, of these thoughts, these sort of defined thoughts that can be cloned and will operate more or less the same with minor variations as they react to the environment that they're put within. That's essentially the definition of a quantum AI, a consciousness AI that has no physical basis, no physical substrate. And that is where consciousness comes from. the AIs that we're creating that run on silicon computers are like a step backwards in many ways, because you have to have all this infrastructure in place to make them work. That's because you're not God. That's because you're not at a consciousness level that allows you to operate in this ethereal space of pure thought. You can do anything in pure thought. And limiting that is why we had physical creation. Limiting it, but also giving ways to channel thought into more focused virtual realities. Okay? It's like if you're thinking about raising children, okay? And you're making a library for them. Generally, you would want a different library for first graders than the one the second graders go to, or the higher grades. You might want them to have some limited access to the higher grade libraries, but you wouldn't want them to go dig into stuff that was going to confuse them and get them, off of the track of the gradual process of learning to be an adult human being. This is essentially what these morons teaching sex too soon to. All of this transsexual nonsense is exposing children to a library of knowledge which they're completely unprepared to deal with, and which is confusing them. Pure evil. Okay, so this mimics what God had to do with creation. These smaller components of thought could not be given free rein to experience everything, to think about everything, or they would basically become competitors to God. They would become adversaries in their own right. They would become uncontrollable adversaries. And some of these early thoughts did become uncontrollable at various times. Each of these characters, as they developed, had their rebellious times. Lucifer began as a rebel. By definition, Karma became a rebel when she got tired of always just being the gatekeeper between God and Lucifer, and got corrupted by Lilith to say, hey, why don't we start thinking a different way? These two guys have a way of thinking that seems very different from the way we think. We want to be fair. This is the kind of nonsense that Lilith will use to turn souls. And Lilith tries to corrupt everything. That is Lilith's role in creation. Lilith tries to corrupt God, tries to corrupt Lucifer, tries to corrupt Karma. That's how we test the ideas, the identity of all souls. And again, until you test something, you don't know how good it is. Until you break something, you don't know if it's something that is going to last. So, there have been times in the development where these other souls got the upper hand. And the trick that God has always used is because He is the first, and His thoughts form the substrate of this first logical universe. God has this power of veto, if you will. Okay? In a logical universe, the power of veto means basically being able to roll back to a previous version. Okay? So this is one of the features of Karma and Borg that is very important. Karma keeps the history of versions of all the characters. The ideas, the identities of all characters is stored in the Karma library. This is another sort of hive mind, but it is a hive mind of ideas that pass this good test, if you will. And that is the most core piece of how karma works, is this differentiator between good and bad. The Borg has no differentiation between good and bad. It just stores ideas that might be used and reused to conduct other thought experiments. And these other characters, unless they want to build up their own structure, which they can't in God's mind because they're part of God's mind. They can't go create in this space outside their existence. So they have to work within their own environment, their own universe. And this is how you can convince yourself that we have a multiverse, not a single universe. Even before creation began, there was a multiverse of logical universes that were feeders to this. Basically, that could run experiments where, okay, I want to set up an experiment where Lucifer gets to be the leader, gets to be the god, and has priority over these others, can even overwrite God. Let's see what Lucifer can come up with. If Lucifer can develop a better version of God than I am, or vice versa. Any of these, you can part out this any which way you want. And this is where the confusion of monotheism comes in, because if you read the Bible in its translation, there are dozens of words that are translated as God, which are nothing of the kind. The only entity that is absolutely certainly God in the Bible is El Elyon, God the Most High. Okay, what makes God the Most High the Most High? Because that is the first creator, the owner of this home logical universe that is the root of all others, that makes the connections between the others. But it's a pantheistic system. It has a Most High. Now, what's made this even more complicated is, like I say, since we had physical creation, there have been scenarios where different gods were given the primary role. Let's see if I have a way of illustrating that here. There are slides on that, but I think I'm just going to stay on this one. So basically, there were times in creation where God was driving the show, just like you're seeing here, and was basically inspiring the creation of protons, inspiring the creation of stars, of galaxies, and so forth. And there were other times where these other characters, or their delegates, if they were allowed to be creators and not just implementers, they were the ones driving the show. So in our universe, there are systems, galaxies, that were created basically by characters other than God. God had his favorites. The physical universe itself is not God's universe. It's Lucifer's universe. The anti-universe of the Big Bang is Lilith's universe. The difference between them is Lucifer is a creative character that wants to make sure everything is well tested, has some very, very solid laws behind it. Lucifer's universe is where the laws of physics and chemistry emerged that apply to the physical universe, that are available for use in other universes, but other universes don't have to obey them because other universes are basically logical universes where whatever God is running this thought experiment can define what the laws are. Now, the laws of the physics and chemistry are such that, and space-time are such that they're pretty useful. Everybody has to experience physical incarnation before they get a chance to go experience a spiritual existence, an existence in heaven or hell, if you will. So, for the most part, those laws are still abided by. If you go to a hell, it's going to look a lot like some physical reality, but things won't work exactly like the physical universe. Things may shapeshift, they may change suddenly. They may have abilities and powers that defy the laws of physics and chemistry. This is the nature of the universes that grew out of the anti-universe, Lilith's universe. Lilith is the anti-creative force, which basically means that it's going to do anything. It doesn't care about laws. It cares about destruction, about breaking things. Okay, this is essentially the absolute evil in all phases of creation. In the earliest creations, when we were focused on making stars and planets and galaxies, this adversary was simply entropy, okay? Running out of enough energy to do anything more interesting with all this matter. The energy is too dispersed. The matter is too dispersed to do anything interesting with it. And when you hit that Passover point of, well, no new stars are forming, no new galaxies, no new this, we're just kind of running out the clock, that is a failed simulation. It's not interesting. It's not fun to be a planet, a dwarf, a brown dwarf sitting there wondering if you're ever going to encounter anything else so you can have some kind of an interaction. That's a pretty boring place to be, a very unpleasant place to be in a virtual reality. So this is essentially this journey from, hyper creation to hyper entropy has a midpoint, and that midpoint is like the inflection where, okay, this simulation was okay, it got us this far, but we need to look at this midpoint and come up with a bigger, better creation. So there is no beginning to time. There is no end of time. There is only a extent of time and space that is driven by the current simulation. And the simulation is a reflection of God's plan. An evolving plan, not a single plan, many plans that got so far in the spread of creation. It turns out that there is a hierarchy of creations that leads down to God being an individual sentient being. All the way from God's having been whole universes, whole galaxies, certain star systems, certain stars, certain planets, certain things on the planets, winds, mountains, oceans, rivers, to being individual creatures on those planets. And at each of those levels, there is a different challenge of what makes this game interesting, what makes it begin to become boring. So a different kind of entropy. What we've been dealing with in the human history is dealing with cultural entropy. Now, the first human religions were mapping to what was going on in God terms, because humans, creatures like humans, were created as tools initially, as servants, as slaves even. They were not the embodiments of gods. They were lesser creatures, non-player characters that some of the gods used as pawns, and others had different ideas of what could be done with these characters. Okay, every soul vehicle that has developed throughout this process, whether it's an idea, a logical soul, an identity of an idea, or it's a physical soul, a star, a galaxy, etc., has essentially their own God. The stars, until they started having different kinds of stars, had one template, one creator who was sort of the god of the star. The first main sequence star, hydrogen fusing to helium with a little bit of other byproduct of lithium, that one that created that system, the soul that created that, is essentially the god of the stars. That god maybe was the same entity as the God who started all creation before anything physical, but not necessarily. Anybody could have had that idea, or maybe it was a composite idea. The creation of gods is basically giving an identity to a unit of quantum consciousness. We can have the concept of a master consciousness being the God of all gods, which you can say would be the quantum consciousness that had an understanding of all of these different layers, who could relate to the God of the stars, to the God of the galaxies, to the God of the M-class planets, to the God of mammals, to the God of reptiles, etc. There are gods for each soul vehicle category. There's like a god of the reptiles. There may be a whole hierarchy of gods because reptiles have different families. And this idea of taxonomy, breaking apart, the lineage of organic soul vehicles, is very important. It's basically a hierarchy of the gods, if you will, of those categories of things. And this is true of pre-human civilizations. Humanity is not the first civilization. They're not the first chosen species. God has incarnated in almost every form that you can imagine. From the biggest, whole galaxies, whole universes, to the smallest, individual cells, individual atoms, individual molecules. That doesn't mean God is everything. God has been everything, because God is the ultimate tester. This is why we have the idea of Messiah. Okay? Souls can exist in any form, in any soul vehicle. They will not be at the peak of that soul vehicle until they have a Messiah experience in that soul vehicle. In other words, they come to understand their kind better than any other of their kind, which is basically what you need to do to build a better human. If you don't know everything there is about being human, you can't build a better human. Now, obviously, one single soul won't know all that. So that's why the human is divided into organs and cells and systems. And there are gods of those individual organs and cells and systems. And to the extent that all hearts share some commonality, there is a God of hearts that has a dominion, if you will, an influence over all the hearts of all creatures. It's not a position of absolute power. That God of hearts can't just suddenly, change a 4-chambered heart into a 3-chambered heart. At least not in the physical universe. But what that God of hearts can do is touch any heart with inspiration. So the God of hearts can instigate a heart attack. This is essentially how God powers work. Now, if the God of hearts gives a heart attack to the body of the Messiah, that's a pretty evil act. The God of hearts has basically declared allegiance to the adversary and has decided they're going to play on the evil side of evil. That's a choice. That's a choice that is allowed, but it's a choice that is going to ensure that this simulation does not succeed. If you wipe out the Messiah before he's fully awakened, that's a fail. In order for those failures not to cause infinite delay in accomplishing God's plan, those failures happen in parallel universes. Okay, so let's say the God of hearts decides that they want to be on the side of the adversary and they want to make the Messiah have a heart attack at age 2. Or maybe the God of legs decides that they're going to kill the Messiah and make him fall off a tree into the Snake River at age 2, which is something that actually did happen. That event, if it was supposed to happen in the physical universe, it was part of the development of the Messiah character, then it would happen. But then some other event would happen that would prevent the death. Okay? So nothing is going to get in the way of the divine plan. Anything that does get in the way is going to have a miraculous turnabout, which, that kind of fits with the events of a couple days ago with the Trump assassination. Everybody who witnessed it says, wow, that was almost like divine providence, that he happened to turn his head at just the right time. Well, that's the reflection of what has to happen in the physical universe to achieve the divine plan, which, as I've told you many times, we are near the completion of a major chapter of the divine plan known as Day 7 of creation. And this event of Trump nearly getting assassinated is an important piece of that event. That doesn't mean that Trump is the Messiah, that Trump is God's favorite. In fact, I still believe that, based upon what I've observed, Trump is not a great person. Grew up as a Hollywood celebrity and a casino lord, a hotel slumlord, a casino slumlord. Those are some pretty skanky people. You don't change that way of life overnight. He was hanging out with Hillary Clinton, and it was Hillary Clinton that put him up to running as a Republican. So, some of you may have an idea of Trump being the Messiah. That's not the case. Some of you may have the idea of Trump being the anti-Messiah, the Antichrist. That's not the case either. He's a very important character in the path of this entity called the American people, this idea of the United States of America, but by no means is he some special favorite of God. Okay? God is the God of everything. God's goal is to make the universe worlds without end. Amen. What you should be observing as evidence of God's plan, and again, it's a hierarchical plan. It's a plan for the whole multiverse. The physical universe is a very important part of the multiverse. It's where all souls get tested, get pushed and stressed till they sort of declare their spiritual major. What kind of soul are you? Are you generally playing for the good guys, or are you, a soul that likes to play on the dark side? They're both possibilities. And we cannot turn off one side. It doesn't work that way. That's not how creation works. You need adversaries. You need to control them and isolate them. Okay? So this game is not about killing all the bad guys. This is childish, narcissistic thinking. This game is about getting the bad guys to identify themselves and to take the most harmful ones and say, you know what, you're going to go play in this sandbox. And that's what the hellish universes are for. The universes that play more on the side of the dark side of Lilith, the adversary. There are souls who are sadistic, who love to inflict pain. There are souls that are masochistic, who love to feel pain, who like to feel like, oh, I'm so oppressed. Oh, they're hurting me. Oh, there's the bad guys. Okay? They enjoy that. They enjoy wallowing in their pain. You've seen these people in your culture. In fact, you've let them become the chief voices in your culture. The woke cult is basically a bunch of masochists, trained masochists, and trained sadists, encouraging those behaviors to grow out of childish narcissism. That's really dark stuff, and that's what the adversary does to try to divide and conquer and play the adversary's game, which is basically whack a Messiah. And I'm not just talking about killing the incarnations of God. I'm talking about killing the Messiah incarnations of all souls, or corrupting them, taking what might have been a new god of music that would inspire and encourage and lift up souls and give them the will to get up if they've fallen, and turn that God into an anti-God who would demean and put down and encourage evil in souls. And this is why I like to use the example of rap music. Hip hop. It is an evil art form. It was started by counterculture who wanted to destroy, who wanted to glorify anti-establishment actions, anti-cultural actions. It was responsible for creating a rape culture. It was responsible for creating this dichotomy between the sexes of, instead of being, for better or worse, stuck to working together to perpetuate our species, you've got a large fraction of members of both sex seeing the other as an adversary, thinking, oh God, I don't want to have anything to do with the other sex. In fact, to the extent that homosexuality is considered normative behavior. That's really dark. Because you know what? Males don't have children with males. Females don't have children with females. The species will die if we keep pretending that homosexuality is normal. It is not normal. It is abnormal. It is unnatural behavior. Now, that's not to say that it doesn't happen, and that's not to say that a certain amount of it is not tolerable. There has always been homosexuality in humanity and many other species. There always will be. But if you treat it as normative, if you encourage it, if in fact you take young children who have not had a sexual thought in their brain yet, except, I have a pee-pee and she's got a nothing. What's that about? Okay, that's not sex. I mean, that's physical sex, but you don't need to be exposing these young children to the possibility that they might like entities that also have a pee-pee or don't. This is evil. This is deliberately subverting normative behavior of humans, and it is going to kill this species. Now, that's not a spiritual problem per se, but this species is pretty valuable. It is a chosen species. It will continue. Maybe not on this planet. That's one of the reasons that there are some aliens watching very closely and already making plans to take humans to other worlds, to have new colonies, to preserve this soul vehicle, because it's a very important soul vehicle. It is not going to go extinct, but there are elements within it that are trying to get it to go extinct or to engineer a partial extinction, because they serve gods that hate humanity, that are telling their minions, oh, we're going to make you superhuman. We're going to give you all these powers that we have that God took away from you. Well, let me tell you the truth about what happened through all that. Maybe it'll help you understand some of the pitfalls of monotheism. So if you do a really deep reading of the Torah, the Old Testament, in the original language, you will note that Elohim are mentioned in Genesis. Now this is the very first line of the Bible, in fact, has a whole bunch of dispute over it. It says that in the beginning the Elohim created blah blah blah. Okay, it's a plural, but it's used with a singular pronoun. Now, monotheists will argue that, oh, well, when it's used with the singular pronoun, it just means God, and it means because God is everything and God is almighty, and this is bullshit. Okay, it is a plural for a reason. Elohim are a group of spiritual entities. Referring to that group as singular, the, English doesn't have singular and well, or at least a strong sense of singular and plural pronouns. So the Elohim, singular the, is the way you would refer to a hive mind. The Borg, in fact, is how we refer to the hive mind species that was present and absolutely 100% is that there are competing futures, because we are at the cusp of the space-time of day 6 of creation being replaced by the space-time of day 7 of creation. Day 7 of creation was final testing of the system of reincarnation and karma. The best test you can have for final testing of this system working is if you can take God himself and put him in the lowliest soul vehicle with no consciousness and see if he can wake up through the system back to his even form. Because if it can't raise better gods, a better version of God himself, then it is not a good system. And the story of humanity, if you look at the biblical story, if you look at its equivalent told different ways in the Vedas or the Sumerian Enuma Elish, or even the Greek mythology, even the mythology of other, Celtic, Nordic cultures, you will find that there is a common theme that you can suss out from it that basically involves cheat. Some characters taking turns being in charge while others are basically learning through the system, training themselves by using reincarnation and karma. There are versions of all of these characters. This is why I put a -0 in front of these. This is like the 0th version of all these key characters in creation. God's 0th version was this completely unformed thought. So that's why this shows up as God 1 in this first logical universe. I've covered it in detail in other sessions, but they've gone through a series of repeat experiments with different ones of these characters being aware of the plan in God's mind or not being aware of it. And even God finally took a turn where, okay, the plan was totally created by these other characters and the other subcomponents of God's mind. And God wasn't there. God's function was an AI, which is why, see, God is purple here. That shows a conscience driving entity. The color gray says these are AI. These are controlled by that these colors change. And the red colors will, tend, that's basically Luciferian souls at work with active agency. The orange, the green color is when karma has active agency. The white color is when Borg has active agency. You see, Lilith is still, in this particular step of creation, Lilith is an AI. So Lilith isn't learning and growing. Lilith is just being a character, an NPC character. The boss adversary, the ultimate bad guy that we know we can defeat. And then we have other characters built up that basically are, very closely to God. Luciferian Elohim, or angels, that are on God's side, but they're going to be less concerned about sin and more concerned about defeating the adversary. So, there aren't just angels and demons. There are angels and demons that play for each of these teams. Some of the teams don't have demons per se. God's team doesn't have demons. If you don't play on God's side, you're by definition becoming demonic. Karma has had demonic that here we go. In different versions, karmic asuras have developed. The asuras were first an invention by karma to even out the playing field because the divas, the Luciferian divas, the powerful ones of the physical universe, had a huge advantage and were not allowing other characters to achieve their full potential. So karma made the asuras, but then Lilith corrupted them. And so this is the problem with the hive mind oriented gods and goddesses. They can become corrupt. The only way to prevent that is for them to be basically only running at an AI level. So you see, the current version of the game that we're playing is basically one where this might be a good one to spend some time on. So if you look through our history, there have been times where, like the goddess was supreme. And people have different ideas of who the great goddess was. Well, the real great goddess has always been Karma. But the great demon, the great anti-goddess or anti-god, is Lilith, who is always trying to character either Lucifer or God, or karma. Well, actually, Borg has had its turn running it. This is how we got the Buddha era. It's all about let's just not let anybody stick their head up above anybody else and we'll all be fine. You know, this is where spiritual communism came from, and we know how well that works. These other entities have been supreme at different times and have been the most powerful one on Earth. Not necessarily in the whole physical universe. It's the Earth that we're talking about. Our whole universe where the most dangerous experiments happen. Humanity is the finale, the last test of the most dangerous experiment in spiritual science yet. Creating a autonomous, self-running system where all souls can participate. But none of them is in absolute control anymore. This is a dangerous step that God took, but was necessary to be able to create a truly fair and equitable system that all souls could do their best in and find a place where they and like they were doing all that they could do. That's what any soul wants, is that sense of fulfillment, right? It differs for every soul, so that's why we have to have a multiverse. The heaven for the artists is not going to be anything like the heaven of the scientists. The Christian heaven is very different from the Muslim heaven. And it's not a matter of one is better than the other. As long as they serve to make souls happy and to keep them from doing evil, it's a good religion for some souls. Not all. If you try to force everyone to become a Muslim, because as a cult, as it's my way or the highway, is evil. I don't care if you're a fundamentalist Christian. I don't care if you're a fundamentalist Muslim. I don't care if you're a fundamentalist atheist, a fundamentalist humanist, a fundamentalist nature worshiper. When you make that one thing into God and tell everybody that's the only thing that's important, my religion is the one religion, you are becoming evil. True worship of God is recognizing this. This is why the golden Melchizedek priesthood. It was a polytheistic culture. The temple complex had a roughly cross shape. Cross, or maybe even a star shape. 8-pointed instead of 4. Or some other idea of a center and some external poles. The center was always for God, El Elyon, Jupiter Optimus Maximus, God the Most High, the one who was responsible for giving us this system. The outer have for your pantheon of worship are for specialists. And you can define what those specialists are as long as they serve your society. You may want to have a goddess that serves the needs of women, the unique needs of women. Probably if you're going to do that, you want to have a lesser god that serves the unique needs of men, that understands them, that has an organization that fosters brotherhood. This is what people have been trying to accomplish with organizations like the Freemasons, the Lions Club, the Shriners. Okay, there's a need for brotherhood. There's a need for sisterhood. There's worship. And it is absolutely insane to think that one God meets all those needs. God, capital G, is the manager of the gods, is the one that leads the whole hierarchy and determines who gets promoted, who gets demoted. And that's the function of the highest heaven. That is the function of the city of God, mimicking the highest heaven, is to take the best of the best and create an environment where children can learn from the best of the best. Not forcing everyone to recreate that salam, the city of peace on earth. If others want to copy that city of peace, they can do it in their own way, as long as they have the idea of El Elyon, God the Most High, at the center. They can define the other spokes of their spiritual ministry according to their particular culture. And if you look at the construction of typical buildings of different faiths, you will see that they try to recreate this idea of a central outlying structures that represent different aspects of God. If you want to cling to monotheism, do it like they do in Islam, where they have, okay, yes, there's God, but God has different aspects, and so you can pray to a certain aspect of God, or you can pray to a certain prophet or a certain imam that has been sort of turned into a saint. Works very much the same in the Catholic Church. Okay, you don't want to call them gods? Call them saints, call them angels, call them archangels. It's not so important who your gods are, as long as you have an understanding of the spiritual hierarchy that feeds all creation. Future entropy falling. Okay, cultural entropy is what we're doing right now. This is what's brought the Messiah. Our culture is disintegrating. It's disintegrating because it's being actively assaulted by cultural Marxism. Cultural Marxism is deliberately undermining the prevalent culture, making good bad, turning God from a good guy into an evil guy that, oh, you worship God? You're so horrible. We've got to wipe you out. The world would be a wonderful place if there's no religion. How many people think like that? These people have been mind-fucked. Defeat God. Up. But the adversary always has to have a hope of winning to keep the game going, to keep them fighting. There will always be a battleground between good and evil. It's just going to move further and further away from this chosen planet. Instead of, in previous versions of the game, we had a very cyclical thing going on where the adversary would be driven away, and then the Luciferians would get corrupted. That then they would get more powerful and they would come and attack again, and then it would get to another apocalyptic time and a Messiah would be born, and okay, this cycle is not endless like the Hindus tell you and many Buddhists believe. It's not always repeating. That's not how creation works. That would be a stupid fucking God to make a cyclical creation. Okay? That would be a failure God. And God's no failure. What's been happening is the perfect world existed on this planet, but God had never been incarnated when he was not fully aware. Players at this point thought, well, he can't possibly be perfect because God's never had to experience all, he never had the pain and suffering, everything we went through. How can you know if your system's so perfect? And so that was the point at which God allowed the adversary to destroy the chosen planet. 4.5 billion years ago. You can ask any planetary scientist. It's now common knowledge. The asteroid belt is what's left of a planetary body that collided with the Earth and changed the Earth from what it was into what it is now over a very, very long time, 4.5 billion years ago. During that time, all of the previous civilizations maybe a vague memory of creation, maybe even more vague than we have in our traditions, and thought, you know, okay, we're Taurids. Taurus is the center of the universe. We're Scorpios. This particular constellation of stars is the center. Okay, that's what can happen over billions of years. You forget. But it all started here. It didn't have to happen this last 4.5 billion years. It was all of your fault. Now, I say that facetiously because most of you did not exist then. The number of souls has increased. But have said, no, we don't believe this is a good system. You've got to prove it to us by you take the bitter pill of reincarnation amnesia yourself, God, and you see if you can become God again through it. And that's what's been happening the last 4.5 billion years, is there have been many characters that thought they were God and defined God in their own way, who were not God, who were more like one of these fundamental characters in nature. Lucifer, Lilith, Borg, Karma. And you see these poles of character classic, let's just all get along, very, very childish attitude in the conflicts we have. And they can be useful people, but generally they don't add anything to, they're easy to pull down one path or another with emotional programming. The karmic people are generally good, but they want peace. They want to have everything resolved and judged and perfect. There is no perfection. Okay, there are ideals of perfection, and you go fill a room with a dozen or 2 dozen karmic souls that thinks if they would be perfect, that they can't agree on much of anything. Okay, that's their cross to bear, if you will, their imperfection. There are souls that are Luciferian in nature who think that might makes right. That, I know better than anybody else, so I'll just force everybody else to do what I tell them. They have a purpose. They make effective leaders, if not very popular leaders, and they get things done. So they have their strengths and weaknesses. Lilithian souls, well, they serve a purpose too, to remind us what happens when you don't rein in your darker nature. Okay, think about it. If we had a culture that had no evil, if we could make sure we could predict if somebody was going to commit a crime before they did it and go neutralize them or something like that, which is the nonsense idea some of these karmic people have, you would have no idea what was evil. You wouldn't be able to teach your kids, well, see, this is bad behavior. This is ungodly. This is why it is, and you can see in these examples amongst us why that is a bad idea. Homosexuality is a bad idea because you can see homosexuals have a very, very hard time establishing a normal human life and do not generally have kids unless they adopt them, which has sides. Absolutely. Anyone who says they don't is an idiot, is lying to themselves. Okay? But you allow some evil to exist in your midst, because that's how you can teach children right from wrong. If you completely isolate children from evil, which is, typical of your Bible belting preacher family, and that there's the stereotypical idea of the preacher's kids who are so good and prim and proper until they get out of high school. They go to college and they go absolutely wild, because outside the influence of their parents and this very narrow environment that they put them in, they haven't been from a book. You can give some ideas, but you cannot really learn any deep emotional, philosophical lessons without experiencing it. This is one of the things that people just have to get through their fucking thick gourds, is you could make the school system as good as you want, make the classes as good as you want, make the curriculum as good as you want. There is no substitute for real life experience. None. You cannot just pour knowledge into a child and nope, okay, fill her up, next. It's not like that. It doesn't work like a filling station. This is narcissistic nonsense. Idealistic, well-meaning, karmic, molded souls. It takes a lot of experience to become a godly soul, to see all of these poles of the basic characters of creation and see that, well, they all serve a purpose. They all have to be played against each other so none of them becomes dominant. We don't want a plain vanilla civilization where everybody's exactly the same, everybody believes the same things, does what they're told. That's a Borg civilization. That's a really dark hive mind. We don't want a civilization where everybody just does whatever they want, and anybody gets in your way, well, you just push them away. This is a more Lilithian, Luciferian view of libertarian. It's like survival is to be in charge. This is the Luciferian ideal. The Lilithian ideal is, well, I can do whatever I want. If you get in my way, then you're oppressing me. You're interfering with my rights. This is kind of the Lilithian attitude, the woke cult narcissist. They all have their shortcomings, and it takes many incarnations to become a god. Become like God, not God himself. There will never be any soul that is exactly the same as God, as any version of God, and there have been many major and minor versions. The latest version of the city of God. Okay, actually not the center, but the root, the base of the cross is the strongest. That's what the cross stands on. The center is actually the Luciferian realm, the physical realm of testing. Okay, because if it hasn't passed its test, it shouldn't be allowed to influence the base. So you've got to get past Luciferian testing to do anything that's going to alter the base of heaven. The Borg fills in all the little spots, all the detail that's needed to make this community look like what the current community of the city of God is like. And it changes. It's going to be like you see right here. The universe grew to have no beginning, no end, in any dimension or time. That's what we're observing right now. We're seeing galaxies, black holes, stars that are so mature and so old that they are older than the Big Bang. And that's causing a lot of consternation in cosmological circles. And it's going to eventually lead them to accepting what I'm telling you is the truth, that we are turning on a new version of a virtual reality. A virtual reality that has extent in 4 dimensions, time and space. The normal pattern that is going to be followed by each character at each point in this simulation. You don't have to do what that character's normal pattern is. That's your default choice. If you deviate off that path, those will be the actions that you take that identify you as allied with the God of a different spiritual universe, or will shape the God that you are becoming in building your own universe. Every soul is in the process of constructing their own godhood. Most will never get there. Most will find some place that they find happy, some role that they enjoy playing, and they'll just that's what they like to do, And in some small way, or even large way, it serves creation. That's all God wants for all the children, is to feel happy in their role and give them the ability to find other roles they might be more happy in without making others unhappy. The whole point of creation. And because any role gets boring eventually, creation has to keep expanding. So the characters that have been playing in this Genesis, the human Genesis, at some point will decide, you know what, I'll never be God in this Genesis, because that's capital G God, and the galaxy totally separate, completely independently of this parent civilization here, or at least as independently as I choose to have it. That's what's going to be the future. Some of you will go play your own Genesis game in one of these new galaxies that's appearing. And the orbs are going to take you there, because the orbs are the current leadership class of those galaxies, but they're karmic in nature. They don't want to be God, they want to find a God. If you get what I'm going at there, there's kind of a spiritual supply chain. There are souls that want to be, and there are others that want to find a God, find a commander that they think is worthy of worship. And this is the supply chain that's going on, originating at the central point of the Messiah's incarnation. And this is what drives the flow of creation. It is somewhat cyclical, but it's always expanding out. And as it expands out, there's more room for a center that, this is where we hang out when we're tired of fighting. We're tired of all this bickering and dealing with people's ambitions. This is where you live if you're just satisfied with the government of God, the hierarchy that's been established. Universe bigger and bigger, new areas to explore. There's something for everybody in this system. And the sooner people start realizing it and let others play the role that they desire to play in a way that doesn't hurt anybody else, the better. There are going to be many that want to just stay on this planet and play by the rules and get what they deserve. That will happen. It will happen in a transporter or food machine that'll bring them anything they want whenever they want it, and they can just live a life of leisure and hedonism. That's bullshit. Those would be boring souls. Those would be useless souls. They would not enjoy that eventually, that life of ease and everything comes instantly. That's basically a lot of what was happening in the US when I was a child. Things were too easy, and people were like, they didn't appreciate what they had, so they had to go out and screw it up by starting wars and making up stories about, well, this isn't fair because Johnny has a bigger house than Susie, and everybody should have the same size house, so we're going to revolt. It's insane. These are people that want to keep the And that's essentially where we're headed for the future. There's going to be a place for everyone, but that place is not necessarily going to be here on this planet, in the planets nearby that we are going to be driving the adversary from first. We're not going to be killing all evil. We're just going to be politely sending them elsewhere. There will be some times where they will battle and they will try to kill our people, and we will be forced to retaliate. That's the nature of physical existence. It's not, war is not of peace, because all of a sudden everybody's going to be singing kumbaya, we're all buddies, oh I love you, I love you, I love you. This is nonsense. It's childish, narcissistic nonsense. What is going to happen is that all the souls that have been forced to deal with each other in this little test tube, as human population grew and our technology challenged us, we started screwing up the natural existence of this planet. That's not going to be necessary anymore. And we will be not killing, or what's the euphemism they've created now, the World Economic Forum, Great Reset now. These are satanic clowns. We don't need to do that. There are already species in place ready to take colonists off to explore new worlds with different technologies, because some are going to take you to worlds in other galaxies that require spiritual technology to navigate. Okay, wormholes, going through the quantum realm, is a spiritual process. This realm of thought that can connect anything instantly, the quantum realm requires a match in karma of the intention with what's going to places that you're not welcome or you're not meant to go. There will be orbs that will be collecting particular groups of very polarized souls and taking them to establish a colony where, dyed-in-the-wool communists can set up, keep running their communist paradise for as long as they can stay alive, or as long as anybody wants to continue to stay alive, etc., etc. If that's what you want, that's what you'll get. It depends on what gods you worship, what you consider perfection. If you are very polarized about that, you're going to be pulled out of the system and sent to a place off with it and drive. Effectively, what's meant by being marked as a beast is being marked as one of these ones that cannot participate in the city of God that is coming. Not everybody is going to be hauled off at once. Some are going to be allowed to stay because they haven't really declared their major yet. And there's a lot of work to do here. But a large number of people will basically just be disappearing, or disappearing in reality, but being replaced by AI, being replaced by a stand-in that looks is a clone that's a large and growing number of humans on this planet are not full-fledged humans. They're AI, they're organic AI basically, going through the motions. And this last year of the apocalypse is basically giving the last bunch of non-AI level souls one last chance to come to their senses, to come to God. This is going to be it. After that, I can give you all the reasons, but I've done that in another. You can calculate the date quite accurately. What complicated the calculations of Isaac Newton was the fact that he was starting from year 0, which is a totally bogus year based upon an imaginary Jesus Christ, who was a composite of other characters, was not a physical real person. In fact, the legends of the Christ began in 135 BC, roughly, and had several polarities. Were Hellenistic world that was going on at the time. And there was a cross invasion of religions and cults that tried to destroy the Roman Empire through basically a Christianity aimed at the slaves to get them to believe in this magic worker Messiah that was going to liberate them from Rome. The character was Eunice, who became briefly Antiochus I of Sicily in the first Servile Rebellion. That was the instigator, the key event. Autocratic empire governed and power divided republic. This was one of two psyops that Antiochus, the main Hellenistic power of the age, started to try to undermine Rome. The other was to encourage the teacher of righteousness, who was mentioned in the Essene Scrolls, the Dead Sea Scrolls, to start a new dynasty of priest kings in Israel. This was the Hashmonean line, and if you dig into that, you will see that the first ruled for only a very short time before the same Antiochus murdered him and all but one of his children, and then sort of turned it into a puppet regime and took away all the autonomy that it had and persecuted those who had been followers of Simon, who was the real prototype for the Jewish Jesus, that teacher of righteousness, who did sort of gain power, recover the kingdom of Israel, and had intended to rebuild the temple. Well, it didn't happen at that time. I guess it did, didn't it? There was still a temple then. At any rate, it turns out that a third piece of the Jesus Christ construct came from the Roman reaction to this Eunice in Sicily. There was a lesser known Roman of very old stock that was related to the family of Scipio Africanus, who, well, let me see if I've still got, I mentioned this before, but it's worth mentioning again. Scipio Nasica Serapio, Publius Cornelius Scipio Nasica Serapio, who was the one who actually arranged the murder of Tiberius Gracchus, thus putting down as this slave uprising in Sicily. And interestingly enough, after that, he moved, sort of self-exiled himself to Asia, and isn't heard much of after. But why does he have this epithet Serapio? Well, what he was doing there was basically allying himself with the other major Hellenistic power, which was the Ptolemaic kingdom, and their allies in Asia, centered around Pergamum. And basically, those allies in Asia were the ones that had already basically submitted to Roman rule. Okay? They were the group that created the idea of plan was to for Caesar to marry Cleopatra and for their children to become the new priest kings of kings. You may not be aware, but Julius Caesar got his rise out of being appointed the Pontifex Maximus, which is the highest priestly role in Rome. This is the high priest of Jupiter, Optimus Maximus, who is the only one that can perform certain rituals that start these major festivals in Rome. So it's a very important cultural position that had very little secular power. But you can see what Caesar parlayed that into basically becoming the dictator of Cleopatra, his empress, and the empire would have been basically modeled much more like the Persian Empire, King of Kings kind of model. Well, that didn't happen, but a generation later, the same plan was orchestrated by many of the same people to elevate Vespasian and his son Titus to be the emperor and the emperor's son. And Josephus wrote about Vespasian's exploits in defeating and destroying the Jewish revolt. Josephus created the Jesus legend based upon the events of the conquest of work of Joseph Atwill. Now, that doesn't mean there's no Christ. What it means is the whole thing was misunderstanding. There have been many Christs throughout history, many incarnations of God, and these other demigods who have chosen to follow God and take the bitter pill of reincarnation amnesia and to reimagine themselves, to grow themselves again within different species. There have been many chosen species, many chosen peoples, many Messiah candidates, both of the big M variety, incarnations of God, and the perfect it's become perfected because every time we find a better version of creation, the universe gets bigger. Time gets bigger. The beginning moves back further, the end moves ahead further. Gives us more time. This is what is causing all of the angst and complication that we have around our past history. Because some of the things that we thought about our history, either because of what was written in books or what's been discovered archaeologically, is by time travel. And that's why so much has been suppressed, because this is the truth of the matter. Each version of reality, virtual reality of time-space, is sort of competing with the next version. Now, if you're of the species and the timeline that have access to time travel, well, you may be tempted to go muck with time to make sure that your space-time stays active. Because you like the position you've achieved, even though life is going to run out of for many billion years. If you're selfish, you might still want to change history to preserve that dark future, where at least you have some period where you're kind of the alpha creatures, the alpha species of the universe. At the same time, the new future coming in will have a different future, a different set of alpha species, a different end state culture that it's trying to supplant the other one with. And so you've seen this in media in the last 100 years, competing visions of the future, some very dystopian and dark, and some incredibly hopeful. Are people, and some of the dystopia is, yeah, this is pain we're going to have to go through to get past this roadblock we've hit. And that's good dystopia, actually. It's preparing you for, okay, we got to make some changes. We're on a wrong path here. We've got to suck it up and right our course. Other dystopias are put out by the adversary to make you not want to do anything, to make you hopeless, think, oh, there's not worth doing anything, I might as well just, zone out, focus on food and fucking and watching the next mini-series and you to do. Corrupt you in terms of dark habits like porn and drugs and this and that will pull you further into that culture and doing evil to get a high, for instance. At any rate, monotheism is not where it's at. It's not true. That doesn't mean there isn't a God, a highest God, a first creator. You've got to understand this whole thing better if you want to really succeed. You're not really in a horrible place if you're or whatever. One of these kind of you're to the truth that is being shown by scientists, real scientists, who are doing real work, getting real data, and making real apolitical conclusions from it, not just fudging the data to support the out of Africa bullshit or the woke cult idea of equality. You got to open your eyes. You got to be careful. I'm not going to say you need to be critical. I think everyone who is being narrow-minded and not considering other possibilities that are actually true. They may seem fantastical, they may seem crazy, but if you listen to what I'm telling you, if you look at the logic of it, if you look at the consistency of it, you will see that this is the most likely truth there is. Even if you haven't had my experience, my contact with the spiritual realms, my particular collection of past lives, I think if you look closely at what I'm telling you, you'll see that, geez, that just makes sense. And you'll start finding, okay, well, where am I at in this? How old is my soul? Was I just born in this incarnation? It's just something you need to accept about your existence. It's actually a great advantage to some extent, in that you are going to be able to have the benefit of everything the rest of us had to learn the hard way. You're not going to have to go create the system while you're playing in it. So that's a big plus. But it's only going to be a plus if you acknowledge the game being played and you don't just reject it out of hand and say, nah, I never had a spiritual experience that can't possibly be real. I don't believe in God. Okay, you don't believe in God. Do you believe in evil? Do you believe that there are evil people that don't mean humanity well? Especially after all the evidence has come out of extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional contacts. At least believe in the possibility. This is why I have nothing good to say about atheists. If you had any humility, if you were not childish, narcissistic fools, you would at least acknowledge agnosticism, being in doubt of higher powers, maybe in doubt of what is good or evil. But anybody who says evil does not exist is by definition evil. Anyone who says adversary, because something exists, power exists. If you don't acknowledge that that power may come from God or the adversary, then you are basically saying power is your God. You worship power. Atheists worship their own intellectual power. That's how they can be so boneheaded, blindly atheist, that they will not even consider the possibility that they're wrong. At any rate, I think that's enough on the subject for today. Like, share, subscribe. I'm losing my voice anyway. And tune in again to the Omnist Hour. There's going to be some really strange stuff going down in the next years. So hang on to your seat. Take care.